Hello and welcome back to Wish for Death Island. I usually open these videos with a meme of some sort, but I genuinely don't know what to do with this one because the story is so weird, and I'm really trying to figure out how to explain anything about it before we start. Well, I guess one way to do it would be, it's kind of interesting to go around looking at more obscure pieces of media. I know we all get a kick of looking at lost media, and while lost media in and of itself is obviously not a scary thing, the more obscure you get, you start feeling a bit unsettled, and when you look at directly stuff that is supposed to be horror, the more obscure that gets, it leaves a bit of an eerie feeling, and this one is definitely obscure and, well, I guess to me, it's probably pretty controversial in some parts of the internet, but this is one that I've known about for a while, but I haven't really seen anyone else talk about it, so I figured that this time I would. It's called Dogscape, and it's, well, before we start, Happy Mail is part 2 of the Pokemon stickers. I also made these little colonial coasters inspired by Old Tomorrows, because why not? And speaking of colonials, Dogscape is pretty similar, but it has dog in the name. Can you guess what that means? I do like to draw the horror concepts as I talk about them in these kind of videos, but this time it's basically a skill issue. I just didn't really flesh out properly what I wanted to draw, and I ended up scrapping it towards the end, so there's not going to be directly a drawing footage video to accompany it like the Urban Spook one last time. This story is a series of logs. It's kind of like a diary, but it also is intercut with people's experiences up front that they aren't writing down, they're just going through them, and it's a little confusing to go between whether or not it's a diary entry or it's just someone doing something, but I think that it's okay, it's unique. Usually I would probably get irritated by that, but it seems to kind of work in this story, at least for the most part. Log 1. I awaken. I don't know it at the moment, but this day marks my 4th straight year of existing in the Dogscape. I push myself up from the carpet of writhing, twitching dog flesh beneath me and rise to my feet, stretching in the morning sun. It took me a while to learn the balance on the layer of solid dogs that now blanket every inch of the ground, but nowadays I can walk and run as easily and as fast as I ever did on soil or concrete, perhaps faster. This was a city once, I think, though which one I can't remember. I only owe my guess to the massive pillars of dogs jutting into the sky, perhaps ancient buildings now completely filled and overgrown by canine biomatter. I climbed once, sinking my fingers and toes deep into the dog wall to gain purchase, and after hours and hours of climbing, I was rewarded with an incredible vista. Fur, eyes, panting tongues and wagging tails, hugging the contours of the once barren land and stretching in a single amoebic mass further than the eye can see. Now I don't do that, though. I merely go about my day. I hike to the gardens, where the dog plants sprout up in bizarre shapes from the floor of the Dogscape, and reach up to pluck fetal puppy fruits, oh Jesus Christ, right off the wagging, energetic branches. I bite into the succulent flesh, the juices dribbling down my chin and dripping down to be reabsorbed by the ground flesh, revel in the savory taste. I'm thirsty, so I range until I find one of the mother mounds, and there I suckle at a teat patch until I've had my fill of milk. Sometimes I see other humans around me, as well adapted to the Dogscape as I am, but I barely acknowledge them, say nothing. What, after all, is there to say? The world is different now. What meaning would our old words have? Free-ranging dogs are becoming rarer and rarer to see now, and those I do see seem as lost, as passive as I am. They too graze on the dog plants, step carefully over the undulating, bleeding dog floor, dimly acknowledging myself and one another. In the distant sky and on the far horizon, sometimes I see massive forms sail or crawl or undulate, and I wonder if in this new world, normal, singular, ambulatory dogs have become as obsolete as I am.
Oh shit, here we go again.
So the Dogscape, according to the protagonist, just happened one day, and it just is now. There is no real before, and there is no after. Everyone just kind of exists in this place, and it's swallowed by the ground, and that's basically how it will be until the last human dies. Humans just live off of the Dogscape, and then they get absorbed into it when they die, and that's it. It just happens. It's very grim. On the surface, it does seem like your typical kind of apocalyptic scenario, but then you remember that every single thing that exists besides humans has been turned into dogs. Dog colonials. Dog flesh, eyes, teeth, paws, everything is just dog. It covers where the buildings used to be, it became the trees and the plants and the streams, and the ground just keeps going, and everything just heals itself really quickly. If you make a big hole in the floor, or the dog floor, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, it'll just grow into as if it was never there in the first place. Now, the person we're listening to did exist before the apocalypse, so this just isn't just the way the world always was, of course, but what the hell happened to the entire world that this was the only thing that was left? The person themselves has forgotten almost everything from the past. There's bits of it here and there, like the reference to concrete, but his mind is just the here and now, because he decided that there's no information that he could really hold about the before time that would matter. Are we not gonna talk about how the entire human diet consists of breast milk and dog fetuses? The entire human diet. There's nothing else that anyone has to eat in any other part of the story. I don't even think that humans eat other humans. They just eat dogs, dog babies, and milk.
Yeah, boy.
And if all of this only happened in 4 years, how on earth did the entire world become this way so quickly? Was it some sort of alien or demonic science experiment? I have so many questions, and judging by the opening of the story, I don't know if I want to know. But this is basically the way to describe what you're getting into. If you feel like you can't handle it, I don't blame you, but this is just the way it's gonna be. You shouldn't be surprised if you continue and then become disgusted with the content here, so this up to you. It does get a bit worse, but there's absolutely no way I can do any sort of warning. I don't do the warning things usually because I don't give a shit, but even in this type of situation, I don't know how I would even begin. So there's that. Log 2. I dug down once, down beneath the dogs, beneath the hair and the ears and the barking. It was hard and took a lot of planning. I had to destroy one of the dog trees with my hands, rip out the twisted, yard-long communal spines that serve them as branches, and lash them together with tendons and skin. But soon I had tools, pitchforks, spears, shovels. I picked a spot where the dog floor seemed shallower and set to work. The blood started spurting when my spear first broke through the surface. And didn't stop for hours and hours. I was drenched in gore and viscera, covered in flecks of bone and meat and brain. But I learned to ignore the sickening squelching sounds, ward off the smell, and just keep going deeper and deeper, spearing and leveling out dogs of stranger and stranger size and build, dogs with 2 heads, dogs with human hands, dogs with writhing tentacles where their back legs should be. Eventually, I came to the end of the dogs, or perhaps the beginning of whatever lies beyond dogs. An expanse of multicolored patchwork fur that extended as far as I could dig in any direction. I could pierce it with great difficulty, but it barely bled, and try as I might, I could only barely peel the skin away, revealing a layer of strained, greyish muscle beneath. It started to tremble as I watched it, shaking the very dog matter around me, and I realized that the dogscape was beginning to regenerate itself, to close in over me, seal me in, so I fled, climbing back up to the light. So beneath the surface of somewhat normal dog flesh and body, other animals, including humans, have been absorbed into the more corrupted layer beneath. Interestingly, even though all the other animals must have died in the same way, humans are the only things that still show. Like, dogs and humans are the only thing that are allowed to exist in a way, and even if a human gets absorbed, there's still traces of human. There's human hands, for instance. Whereas we don't see anything else. We don't see cats or cows or birds even. There's nothing else besides human and dog. So why is it just human and dog? We understand that something happened with the dogs, but why is it that the humans are the only thing that still is allowed to exist in any capacity? The blood and anything else seems to go back into the ground, or the flesh, I suppose, so it's like a very self-contained and hostile entity that is just one being. The dogs are alive because they're animated, but they don't seem to care about any of this, so it's like they're just a hive mind going through motions but don't actually think at all. Well, basically, I was watching Wendigoon's video on the blood meridian thing, and I had it synced up to watch with some other people, and I was like, he says it's so disturbing, he has 5 hours to convince me it's more disturbing than the Dogscape. The book and Dogscape are like apples and oranges at this point. Like, I'm not actually going to try and compare them in any capacity, but I just think it's funny that my idea of disturbing literature is like, it's like, yeah, I know this nightmare about war and the human condition is very insightful and bleak, but have you heard the story about the dude who eats dog fetuses? Anyway, one of the main things that occurred to me with the fused humans in the deep ground is that I wondered if humans were capable of being fused with the Dogscape and still being alive, in the sense that they'll blink and speak, or if they just kind of become the remains of human skin and whatnot that are now non-functioning. A similar thing happens in this story, but at this point in time when I was reading, I was immediately just wondering if that was going to happen to the main character. It also introduces us to the idea that nothing in the Dogscape resembles human tools or materials anymore in the traditional sense. There's no metal, there's no minerals, there's absolutely nothing. So if you have a tool, it's made out of dog bone or teeth or something like that. And if you have clothes, they're just furs from the ground and whatnot. So whatever you can imagine comes from this select category of material or organic matter or whatever you want to say. Flint and steel, I imagine, are just like two bones being knocked together. So these people have regressed beyond cavemen in the sense of primitive. There's a sort of similar gruesome story I know of called How to Survive in Hell, but even those guys in that creepypasta still have access to buildings, metal, cement. They have to get clothes and meat from humans, but they still have some sense of other, like sand, glass, rusted metals, wood. The Dogscape guys have less than guys in actual hell. Log 3. The stream trickled warmly past the black leathery edges of the puppy mouth stream. The saliva waters churned as they flowed from the head of the stream, lined with everlapping tongues of eager greeting puppies. To feel a rock on the shore is to find a sharp milk teeth of weaned dogs, cast to the tufts of mange weeds growing into spits and banks. The head of the stream is split by a single mound of golden fur, like an upholstered boulder set with a large golden eye that swerves to see passing visitors. The waters will bubble and froth should the eye see you. The tongues lap nervous, loving greetings with gurgled yips. I don't know why, but the river grosses me out the most. Like, every other thing in this series of entries has been so much worse. It's just gore and gore and gore, but I just read it without giving a shit. And then the saliva river is described and I'm like, ew. This also shows that they do have different forms of liquid. Like, they have this river, they have blood, they have milk, but the water is obviously not fit for doing much. The milk they find is actually better for their bodies, and it makes sense that they don't come to the river often for anything. It seems a bit useless. The eye is interesting though, like, the river frothing when the eye sees you shows that dogs do register someone's presence, and it gives them enough awareness to know that there are beings outside of themselves, but the way that they register these beings, whether it be benevolent or malevolent, seems to be based upon what part of the Dogscape they're at. The river doesn't seem to give a shit, but there's different parts of the Dogscape that straight up want to eat humans. Log 4. The Dogscape. That's what we call it. Us humans that banded together, I mean. We sit around campfires and cook the whelps that we collect from the dog trees. The only flammable material we have is the acrid fur that grows everywhere. It offends all senses, but soon the meal is prepared. The only food sources are the dog trees and the mother mounds. Some foolish enough dig for meat. Though the reward is great, many don't come back, for the dog flesh regrows above them, trapping them inside the moist ground. Primitive tools are forged from clothes and leather, such as shovels and knives and cloves. I have lived here for as long as I can remember. There are faint shimmers of the time before the dog flesh, but what use is there dwelling on the past when it cannot fill our stomachs in the present? I am our tribe's scribe. My name is Doc. I used to have a real name, but now it escapes my memory. I record all of our findings and knowledge in my leather pages using dog blood as ink. There were times when there were more of us. The tribe started with as many as 60 people. Now, our numbers are as few as 20. Our leader is Keith. He instructs us to find food, build shelter, and bring fire. He abuses his power, taking 5 wives and eating more than his share of the food, but those who speak against him meet death in the night. It is hellish, but there is no other choice. Without guidance, we will die out here, so we must remain under his leadership. There's another way to get food besides the fetuses, I guess, but it's basically never used because the meat is so risky to get that it's just something that you would die if you tried. This definitely altered my visuals in my head, seeing the dogscape as, because I figured it would be easy to just dig a little bit of fur off and then see the interior just being like dog meat, you know? But since blood came up so easily as well, it just seems like it would be easy to do that, but I guess everything is just so densely packed that actually finding edible meat is not a easy task. It just definitely made it a little weirder in the way that I was imagining it. He goes on to describe how one of the other tribe's people was killed by stepping on one of the dog mouths. These are the big, almost like giant bear trap or Venus flytrap type of structures that will be in the ground, and you have to be careful to not step in them. Sometimes they'll even appear while you're trying to dig for meat because they'll be like further underground, and if you step in them you're basically dead because they won't let go and you'll just bleed out. These seem to be like spots on the landscape that react violently, as opposed to the eyes and the other types of the dog parts that just don't give a shit. There are certain spots that humans just can't walk on because their feet will get all cut up, and the leader then took the dead guy's belongings, and the main character had to beat the guy to death because he was just gonna bleed out and suffer. There was another guy who refused to dig for meat because he knew that it was certain death, so the leader just killed him by bashing his skull open as a lesson to everyone else who would have defied him. Everyone else starts whispering that the main character should take over because they assume that since he's the only one who is able to read, he's the only one who's smart enough for the job, and the only reason that he's able to get away with writing these kind of things in the journal about how much the leader sucks is because the leader can't read. There's only 18 members of the tribe left at this point as well. One of the higher up diggers says that they should do a distraction and overthrow the leader. This involves the main character getting up during dinner and announcing that he's going to overthrow the guy, and while the guy is distracted, everyone else beats him up. The main character just agrees, but then when he goes to do it that night, he realizes that this was like a insubordination trap, and the guy that mentioned it was actually the second in command of the leader, so they end up exiling the main character by tying him to a dog tree and just leaving him to starve in the daylight. Then this happens. When the sun was the highest in the sky and the heat became unbearable, I saw figures on the horizon. They were not human. They were the hounds that came to eat what the humans leave behind. I thought they were going to eat me, but instead they went for the blood-soaked meat tropes that held me in place. I was free. I kneeled down to the hounds and looked deep in their eyes. I told them I knew where they could fill their bellies to the brim. They barked once in what I assume was confirmation. I stood up and we set off to the feast. When we reached the settlement, it was amidst their feast. I approached, death in my gaze. Keith was shocked and angry. The diggers and gatherers were quick to his defense. I guess he bribed them. I whistled and the hounds slinked through the fur to my side. We struck like a lightning bolt. My fist smashed into Keith's face just as my hounds pounced upon his closest guards. Though I was physically weak, I was quite fast. I stole a shovel and quickly buried it into Keith's throat while he was disoriented. The smell was sickening, as I expected from a man like him. The hounds made quick work of the rest. I helped, of course. None was spared. I made sure I had my vengeance upon Gar. He's the guy who did the insubordination thing. The hounds were quite full by the end. I took my time and buried each corpse, or what was left of them. I leave this book upon their graves in the hopes that someone who can understand it finds it. If you do, take heed of these words. The dogscape knows all and is strict but fair, but she provides justice where justice is due. So I guess there are hellhounds in this joint? Apparently the dogs are all absorbed besides very rare sightings of actual dogs, but these are like corrupted versions of those dogs. I guess the pit bulls died first because there's no more toddlers to eat. But nevertheless, the main character is alone again. The entire tribe is dead. All the wives, all the diggers. That means the human population took another devastating hit. It's hard to tell if we're following the exact same person for all of this. I don't think we are for some of them, but most of the time it's a bit strange. Either way. Log 5 is a very short entry about how this guy had a dog before the apocalypse. The dog was really helpful and caring, like you'd expect from a dog. During the dogscape, event, they helped each other a lot, but one day the dog got caught in one of the mouths and was eaten alive. He wonders if the dog is absorbed somewhere underground or just dead. So the dogscape can still eat everything. Like if you're a normal dog, you're not gonna be spared. Normal dogs don't just get a pass, they die in the same way. Makes sense why you don't see any of anything else anymore. Any other remnant of any other animal is just gone. It's like just humans and dogs. And it's almost like both humans and dogs relate a bit to the dogscape, so it's not just dogs in the amoeba abomination mashup thing, it's also human somehow. So there seemed to be some sort of event where humans and dogs merged together for some reason. Log 6 is another short one. Another person, I think, because they say that humans are kind of receding and becoming more animalistic. They're starting to worship the dog as a goddess and giving things to her. The fur that they're wearing isn't literal, I think it's just clothes made from the dog fur, but they're actually mentally regressing to become more like the dogs in the fact that they're walking on all fours and whatnot. They're forming cults around it and going insane. I mean, what else are you supposed to do in this situation? Like, might as well, right? Log 7. I think we knew that the war had been lost the day the general committed suicide. The masses of flesh and fur just spread, like waves across the cities. We found out that whatever it was drinking the oceans and eating anything that it came across. Airstrikes, tanks, bombs, it only slowed it down. We were living on borrowed time. It was unstoppable. I don't think it was until later that we noticed all the dogs were gone. Then, at night, the howling. It was just too much. The former soldier's face streamed with involuntary tears as he remembered the events. He sat there, wallowing in his own emotions, telling his story to a skeleton he found. My unit, completely wiped out. I saw those tentacles and those mouths and they tore them to shreds. I ran away, even as they called for help. It's all your fault! The dog tree shifted slightly. The many eyes growing around directed their gaze towards the psychotic man. You ruined everything! You ruined my friends, my family, goddamn everyone! He ran and stabbed one of the eyes with a bone fragment. The howling noise emerged and a nearby dog tree swatted him several yards. He broke a few ribs when he hit the ground. He coughed a bit of blood, but got back up and charged again. This time he ran towards one of the open mouths around and kicked several of its teeth out. It bit his foot in response, costing him a toe or two. He was so full of adrenaline that he was incapable of registering any kind of pain. He beat and tore and bit at the flesh with his bare hands until he was knee-deep in blood and gore. One of the tubes he tore spilled some sort of digestive fluid over him. It burned, but he had to go on. He dug and dug with his bare hands until the ground started to close above him. He kept digging until he found them, the heart and the brain. He laughed at his fortune of finding both of them so very close together. He jammed his hands deep into the grey matter, disturbing the contents and slowly losing oxygen in his tunnel of meat. He gasped and clawed at the heart, tearing it out of place. He collapsed and blacked out. He awoke to many tentacles burying themselves in his body. One hit his spinal cord and fused with his brainstem. A flood of thought all hit him at once, as he suddenly became one with the dogscape. More tentacles connected themselves to his vital organs as he became assimilated. He saw through every eye in the lands, and he felt every single nerve on the planet. The healing factor continued tearing him apart, but adding new pathways and connections. It wasn't long until he was entirely consumed. His memories faded away as his brain was reorganized into replacing the one he had destroyed. This point in time that this occurs is not entirely clear. Like, the timeline is very loose, as it is, but this is just not even in the timeline that I can construct. It just happens. Still, it gives us this idea that the dogscape spreads rapidly, but didn't happen like overnight. It happened with enough time for people to try and fight it very briefly before everything went to shit. It's also not clear what humans could survive and what humans couldn't survive. Like, most of them probably just got eaten by the dog as it spread because they couldn't find a way to escape in time. I suppose some humans managed to maybe hide somewhere or like climb on top of the dogs and adapt quickly enough that it just didn't care about them as much. Either way, everyone died or wishes they were dead now. This must have been recently after the scape took over because the dude still has his clothes on him from that time, and I don't really hear about skeletons that much. It's mostly just humans that recently die. I think that maybe this skeleton was one of his friends from that time. Maybe, I don't know. But the soldier, being hostile to the surface that was otherwise indifferent of him, angers the dogs, and he agitated the surface, and then he started burrowing into it. This is when he was assimilated, so it definitely reacts stronger and assimilates threats if you're very proactive and that kind of thing. I think that makes sense about why the meat is so hard to get, because you're basically attacking the surface to try and get something out of it, and the dogscape registers this as hostile and just attacks you and assimilates you. This is kind of what you'd expect from an entity like this, but it almost comes across as a bit shocking to me because this thing is so strange and it defies everything to the point where it's like the story that completely baffles me, but the minute that it does something that kind of makes sense to me, that comes across as weird. Like, the soldier's thoughts are just gone. It's very fast working, it seems. I still don't know if he died in a sense, or if he would be vaguely responsive to other stuff. Like, even with the dog behavior, it makes me think that humans that become part of the dogscape just become dogs, like they act like dogs. And it seems like humans who cared about the world beforehand all just died, because to have emotions and to care means that you're vulnerable, and all of them just died, which is why the people who are in the present act like there never was a before time. It's always been the dogscape, because that's the way that they can adapt, and after so long they go a bit crazy and they genuinely believe it. The next log is back to either our guy or someone kind of like him. He says that it was 3 years ago that he saw the last human being, so this is after the tribe. He's been alone the whole time, and the only way he knows time has passed is because he marked it into his skin like tallies. He writes journals because some part of him thinks he needs to. Some part of him still kind of cares, but he doesn't even understand why, so he just writes anyway. It's something constant that he knows. You know, like everything around him stagnates and changes, but at least he has the journal. He then says that he ran into something terrible and he doesn't even know how to describe it, but he has to because part of his brain, the part that cares, is not letting go. The day started normally. It was my weekly gathering day, so I left my tent to collect the dog fruits I would need for the week and to fill a bag or two with milk. But when I got to the place where there would have been teats, there was just a bloody mess where someone had dug deep into the flesh of the dogscape. I didn't really think much of it at first, just that I would need to go looking for a new source of milk. Then I saw it. I thought it was a person at first. If I had stopped to really look first, I wouldn't have had any problems and wouldn't be writing this right now, I guess. I started shouting to get its attention, and I did get its attention because it turned to me, and then I realized that I had made a huge mistake. Thinking back, the really long arms and the twisty body probably would have been my first clue, but I didn't really see that anything was wrong until it turned towards me. And I saw what I thought was a head, was just a featureless lump of flesh. Its arms unfolded outwards, each ending in 2 canine legs, and the human face on its chest opened its mouth and started screaming. I figured it was bad news then, and made a mad dash for the nearest pillar of dogs, but it kept running after me and it was much faster. Somehow, I managed to make it, and I started climbing to climb out of its reach. I didn't get very far before there was a sharp pain in my leg, and I looked down and saw that it had bitten me with one of the many canine mouths along the arm things. I screamed as it pulled me down, but it didn't do much, and I probably would have died right then if it weren't for what happened next. Out of nowhere, a mouth I didn't even see when I started climbing the dog pillar bit down on it. And then one in the ground, and they started chewing at it, but it didn't really seem to hurt it, but it let go all the same. I ran away as fast as I could, but I could hear that scream long after I was out of sight. I didn't sleep that night. I don't know if that's the same soldier or someone else. I think that the dogscape heals very quickly, and there's still a bloody gash there, so maybe this isn't as long ago as I thought it was for the soldier, because I feel like the wound would have healed in the landscape. Maybe this guy somehow survived so long that he just suddenly had an outburst and killed himself at that moment because of the stress, I guess. I don't know, but in any case, it says that the man lost his memories and he became the dogscape, so even though he's screaming, it's just the dog creature that's using his mouth to scream. It's like The Thing, where it uses the human facilities, I suppose, to speak and whatnot, but it's not actually them. But if he's never seen this before, it means that the dogscape is somehow evolving and it can move itself using the power of freshly absorbed humans and expand. It's new, so that means that the dogscape is continuing to evolve itself, and even after all the humans die out, it'll keep doing things, I guess. The next log is a short memory. Ticks are basically the only thing that can thrive here. Some of them are so big that they've become mutated and giant. They swarm around in big clouds and drink dog blood, but sometimes they go for humans too. There was a man that the main character once saw covered in them to the point where barely anything could be seen of the man, and he only said one word: itch. Log 10. Today is the 5th day of the 12th month of the 654th year. Ours is the final generation. After us, the dogscape will be all that is left, and all remaining men will either absorb into Mother Dog or perish from the swiftly dying world. I was a bit confused with what this meant initially, because in my head, I don't think humans lasted 600 years in this dogscape. I just didn't think it was possible. I thought he was just counting funny. I don't know where the 600 figure came from initially, but I think that maybe either he's counting some of the before time for some reason, or it really is 600 years at this point. The main character that we knew is just gone, so this is the new guy that we're following, who is kind of the same type of person, just centuries in the future. It says in this case now, it's very rare to find anyone, if you're not already with the tribe, because most of the population is dead. It's very, very rare, even more rare, to find women at all. The ones that are found are either taken as quickly as possible, or they're just killed by the dogscape. The women are basically the only things that even tie tribes together, because they keep everyone in a group to protect and use the woman, especially for repopulation purposes as well. It reminds me a bit of the game Lisa, where all of the women are annihilated and the ground just becomes desert because nukes kill everything or something. Because the women get taken by the dog flesh, and then the tribe starts killing each other because there's nothing tying them together anymore. They're frustrated, and they even start having sex with each other out of desperation because they can't have that sort of human contact anymore. It's a wasteland, and there's no women or ways to really repopulate or form families. Everyone is just surviving, so they revert back to being animals in the truest sense and get very aggressive with each other. The next part, I have no idea how to provide any sort of commentary. There are basically female dog sex organs that men find, and these are called dog mounds. Because of the lack of human females, the men become insane and they attach themselves to one of the mounds and do things until they die. Like, actually until they die. They attach themselves to it and then just keep at it until they die. And then their skeletons are so fused with the mound that the bodies and corpses remain attached to the mound even after death. That's really all you need to know. It goes into a bit more detail, but I don't want to read it. So the dude that we're reading from finds this disgusting, as you would, and goes on his way. He stays alone until 10 years later when he finally sees a woman. She's just eating dog fruit and standing there, chilling. So, he does his thing and claims her as his own, because caveman. The next day she's pregnant and he has to protect her from everything, like, you know, the random mutants in the landscape. She gives birth the next year and it's a small baby girl. They're both very happy because they feel like the girl is a sign of hope, but then this happens. No sooner had I set the girl down than a furry tendril shot out from the dog tree. With a whack, it wrapped quickly around the umbilical cord and gripped it tight. As the dog tree sunk into the ground before me, I hacked at the vine, but it could not be cut. Next, I went for the umbilical cord, tearing with all my strength to save my girl, but the vine had melded it, and converted it into the same strong substance, so I could only watch in horror as the dog tree disappeared into the mother dog, dragging my woman and daughter with it. I dug after them, ripped the dog flesh open enough to watch as the mutated dogs of the upper layers tore at the child's face. There is no hope for the human race. The dogscape will not tolerate disloyalty any longer, and so I commit myself to the dog mound, and to become truly one with the mother dog. What a damned fool I was for ever thinking that I could beat this world. So all this hope that he had was gone. After 10 years, he finally found someone else, and she was gone. After the year that he knew her, and she took the future with it. He had nothing. The cruelest thing ever done to him was to make him remember what something felt like before taking it away again. The next log is weird. It's very different, and I don't think I like it too much. It's about some aliens, I guess. It's just dudes hanging out in space, coming to visit Earth after a long time. They had a signal like 700 years ago or something, and it would basically be like the modern day for us right now, of just like our pop culture and stuff like that. But traveling took so long that they only showed up now, and the entire planet is a dog now, so it's just like a weird writhing brown mass, and the aliens freak out because they think that this isn't what the signal was, so they think that something's wrong and they leave. It's just a bit stupid. Like, I feel like we didn't need to see some aliens looking at Earth and being like, bro, that's fucked up, lol, and then just fucking off. Like, it's like if In the Road by Cormac McCarthy, like everyone's just being miserable, and then some alien looks down and is like, wow, that's fucked up. Why are you here? I guess it's just a personal thing for me that I like my stories like this to be more self-contained, I suppose. There's a lot of horror when it comes to isolation. I don't know if this is actually a fair comparison, but something like Skinamarink, for example, if they're all just doing their thing and it's really cool, and then all of a sudden some like Troy McClure shows up and he's like, hello, that's pretty fucked up. It just removes a bit of that scariness for me because of the isolation, and there's this kind of bubble around everything, and it just gets broken by an outsider. The entire world kind of feels like this isolation because of how bleak everything is, and then the aliens just show up and break the bubble. You know, the story recovers afterwards. Like, basically you could cut out the entire thing about the aliens and it's not really changed that much because the alien thing just doesn't matter. So it's not like it ruined the story for me entirely, it's just I don't really know why it's there. There's another log about someone else where he sees basically two dog mounds that are male and female, and it infinitely produces dog mutants. Like, it's just constantly going at it. It senses him and then drags him into it. And that's all I can describe. I don't think that I can say more on YouTube.
Yeah, boy.
In log 13, we get a bit of an origin story and some religious stuff that developed in the dogscape. God, as we know it, is gone besides a few people here and there, and it's considered barbaric, I suppose, which is funny, but the dominant belief is the dog mother. It's basically like a fucked up version of the Tree of Life, but with dogs. I'll read a bit of the story, I suppose, about how this happened, according to people who only really have echoes of the original story because the truth and the understanding of it was lost so long ago. There is a god, or a demon perhaps, a dog that lived amongst the humans, was even accepted and provided for by a human family. But it was no ordinary dog. This beast lived for over 50 years, while canines of the time rarely lasted more than a decade. It was greatly powerful, more in control of its owner family than they were of it. They say it went out at night and hunted human prey, bringing back large collections of bones as trophies to its home. But the humans tried to ignore it, convinced themselves that it wasn't the problem. Soon though, as the origin dog reached a century of age, it became increasingly powerful and unlike others. There were more strange disappearances and even attacks during the day. Vehicles were found with deep bite marks through metal, and homes were burrowed from below. The government of the time, many times more powerful than any of the chieftains today, captured the hellhound. They performed experiments, tried to understand where it channeled its energy from. Progress was good. It looked as though even the secret of immortality could be gained from this dog. But accidents did occur. The betrayer, as they call her, who worked at the government facility, felt sympathy for the god dog. She released him, and concurrently, the all-consuming hell that is the dogskin. The enraged beast no longer held any sympathy for humanity. As it thrashed recklessly through the lab, mutated samples adhered to its flesh, growing like a cancer. Soon, what would become the dogscape was spreading like wildfire, its maw gnashing at everything that moved, its hide spreading over soil, stone, and sea. What is the name of this horrible demon? It varies, but they all come from similar etymological origin, I believe. I have taken down the names from over the world. Marmaduke? Marmaduke. And yet the dog mother was most certainly feminine. Well, it is said that the betrayer was, in fact, the first human assimilated into the dogscape. But it does seem to be some sort of weird freak of nature. I guess you could even call it some sort of creature like a cryptid or something. We still can't be sure if it's paranormal or some sort of cryptid, but it makes more sense to be a sort of sciencey leaning cryptid to me. I'm gonna go with that. It seems interference made it react and absorb everything in its path. It basically started spreading and everything turned into organic matter with the same brain. The human with the dog fused together so that the dog mother could be born, and because it's female, it keeps reproducing and expanding. The human who lost everything, our main character, is now walking to the cold. He doesn't care about going back the way he came, and he pretty much sets himself up to survive as long as possible to explore before he just dies where he stands. He's just going to walk. He has a lot of food and milk prepped, but he knows that he won't really find more because he sees that the landscape is turning into a tundra and getting flatter. There's no trees or any of the usual sort of dog plants around. Everything is just flat fur that maybe has some ice on it because of frozen dog fluids. He also starts hearing less and less of dog noises, and his hand starts going numb even in his furs because it's just so cold. The ground feels harder here. The gentle give of the dog land has ceased, giving way to a dull, sound-absorbing thud of matted fur. I slipped yesterday on what seemed to be a lake of solid piss. It was not reabsorbing into the mother. My own shivering seems to syncopate with the occasional rumbles of the mother. Her flesh is no longer seeming like a living being, but I know that deep within her the blood flows. It's so cold here. I continue forward every day. The ground slopes more, and I struggle to sleep in a forgiving skin fold. There is no purpose but to move forward now, one foot in front of the other. It has been dark for as long as I can remember. How long will the night last? The air is dry. The land is mostly featureless and hard as I walk. The wind blows clumps of brittle hair across my face, and they hurt. A soft pop, a subtle blue flash, and they blow past me. My hands are deep within my coverings. They are numb, and if I expose them to ward off the shocks, then the cold will take them from me. I've already lost 3 toes. I can no longer feel that foot. I no longer bother to light fires in the deep crooks where I sleep, but the last I saw of that foot, it was black and swollen. It felt like it was burning. His rations run out, and he's sliding around finding bones of dead humans preserved in the frost. He finds this chasm made of bone, and it freaks him out because he almost slid into it and died. He basically finds some blood that is actually moving for once, and he hasn't eaten in so long that he just drinks some of it. It's at the point where he's almost frozen to death, almost dead from lack of any sort of substance, but this is just enough for him to hang on for just a bit longer. He also notices subtle signs of the chasm growing with stretch marks and whatnot, whatever that might mean. I'm just going to read the last bits here so I can talk about it because it's very interesting. I am so weak and it is so cold. My filled bladders of blood are gone and the grey dogscape stretches before me. I must make it to my goal, for I do not know what my goal is. I have walked for what seems like months in the darkness. I climb down a huge mass of frigid dog flesh. It is like a great heap of small dogs, a pile of dog heads and legs and mounds of tails and torsos. It is cold and lifeless. A slow, low creaking can be heard deep within it. I grip an ear and lower myself to the bottom of the wall of dog. My foot lands on something else. I gasp, then get caught in a fit of coughing. I don't know what I'm standing on, but it is not the mother. I feel queasy, nauseous. What could possibly not be the mother? It's frigid and hard, but I scrape at it and bits of dandery coldness come off of it. I hold them close to my face and my breath turns the stuff to water. I try to eat a handful of it, but it is so cold that it robs me of almost all of my remaining energy. The moisture trickles down my throat. It is good. I look behind me at the dog wall, with its exposed frozen bodies and happy-looking faces, then ahead of me at the featureless dark. I am too far gone to turn back now. I continue walking for hours, then sleep, then walk more. My footsteps are leaden. Finally, ahead of me, I see light. I make my way towards it, slowly, over the course of several hours. It is a beacon to me now, a bright, growing, steady fire. As I approach it, I see that the guiding light stands on a pole before a series of low, dark structures. They are like solid walls of bone, but not. They are not of dog flesh. The billowing hair and cold, dandery water pile against the sides. I know that this was what I was destined for. At one end, near the light, a dark panel sets into the wall. On it are markings placed there by some person's hand, but I don't know what they say. AIS 1 and entrance. I shoulder against the panel, but as it barely shudders. I try again and again. I am renewed with purpose by the discovery of this place, but I am weak from my travel. I lean my back to the panel and slide down it, exhausted. My back catches against a low bar set into the panel, pushes it down and then clicks. The panel gives way and I fall into the darkness within. I fall into the small dark drive cave. It is alien to me. The wind blows debris and fur into the room with me. I look around. Strange dark masses seem to leer at me. There are soft white skins hanging on the wall and more of the usual markings everywhere. Procedure list and keep close and warning and wear radio at all times. A bright red cylinder with yellow stripes is inside a small box. I reach for it, but my hands scramble against the clear covering across the entrance to the box. I look at my hands now. They are purple. I cannot feel them anymore. Another panel is on the opposite wall, like the one I opened. I move towards it feebly. I am so cold. I pull the handle set into the panel, but it does not move. A small red light flashes above it. I pull harder, but it does not move. I pull again, jumping, but lose my balance and lurch to the ground. I smack my head with a dull thud. The wind is blowing fiercely from the opening behind me. I scrape against the hard panel, but it will not move. More markings adorn it. Close outer door first. I don't understand them. I sit against the panel, my vision is blurry and a trickle of my own blood sweeps across my eye. I go to sleep there, leaning against the dark doorway. I sleep and do not wake up. Epilogue. My name is Charles Mountill, of Arctic Ice Station 1. The abomination is not here, it is too cold. Tia and I are the last survivors. We are 14 nautical miles south of the North Pole, directly north of Vancouver. Triangulate our position based on the radio signal. This message will repeat in 5 minutes. The radio broadcasts the message again, as it had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times. A cold, dead, desiccated body sat huddled before the radio system in the chair. At its feet lay the curled, dead body of a mutt. So the last of humanity, the last signs of anything not organic, were still hunkered down in the bottom of the tundra. It's been so long since the humans as you or I know them that the humans of the dogscape don't understand any of this. They don't even know what metal is because they've never touched it before. In fact, part of the cold rushing in would have been prevented by the guy just pushing down on the door to close it again and reading the sign, but he doesn't understand any of it because to him, why would he know any of that? He doesn't know what doors are. He probably doesn't even have any sort of shelter besides a cloth tent. He freaked out at the idea of a room in general because he doesn't know what it is. The temperature, I guess, is so cold that the dogscape kind of hibernates at that specific part, but it seems to be growing, so maybe even in a couple hundred years, this specific room will also be buried. At the dawn of the apocalypse, the last human of the world that we know it today really made his own message. Somehow it repeats. I don't really know why or how, but I think maybe the dogscape energy is sustaining it in a way, because the lights are still working for some reason. The body is also preserved because of how cold it is, so the character we were following is probably going to be just as preserved next to him if anyone else ever makes it in here, and if the doorway somehow doesn't just close and seal up with dog flesh eventually, even if it takes 1,000 years. It reminds me of The Road in a sense that this world is and will be, and humans are just there. It's like when you're reading about a world and it's just, there's no need for anything. It seems like every story, rightfully so, has this sense of movement in it. The characters change because they go through things, so they go through character arcs, and the things that go on in their minds, it's a movement, the movement of change. They go doing specific tasks and quests and stuff because there's change, there's movement. It would seem kind of counterintuitive for there just to be a thing that exists and no sense of movement or progression whatsoever, because you would read the story and think, there's no story here, why am I reading this? But then you see something like the Dogscape and it's somehow interesting even though there's no movement going on. Like even in The Road, even at the end, there's a sense of something changing, something happened, there's new people come and go. different bits of the world are given to us, and Dogscape does have some sense of that, but there's just snippets of little happenings going on, and I don't like the tribe's person who killed all of the other bits of the tribe because they betrayed him. He had his story and then he just got absorbed, and that was the end of it. No one else probably knows how to read. He probably just left the book there and it got absorbed into the Dogscape forever. No one else knew what his story was. Random people who just got absorbed because they walk the wrong way and we only see them for a sentence or two. Then the very last guy, who knows how many people are left who are able to read out of him, and even then, only knows a couple words. They probably spell words entirely different than us, and when he sees words written by the humans of the past, he doesn't know what they are, so they can't do anything and they can't save him. I think because of this sort of stagnation and the lack of usual plot movement, it almost comes across as it being an obscure find is in its favor for me, because it had this kind of atmosphere of strange and, you know, in its own little pocket where no one else really was looking at it or talking about it, and it in a way kind of matches the stagnation of the story. Like, it just seemed to fit the mood and the atmosphere that made me appreciate it a lot more, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm even making sense at the end of this, but I thought it was an interesting story. For people who made it this far, I know that Monument Mythos has a season 3. I am looking at it. I am going to talk about it. I know. I'm not exactly sure when that will be, but it's coming as well. If you have any weird stories like this that you'd like me to talk about, I definitely would love to see more, because I love going into stuff like this. And that's really all I have to say. If you want to see some of the stuff on screen, there'll be a video linked in the description where you can watch more or purchase some of them from my shop. And don't die in the Dogscape, please. I need you here for the next video. Bye for now.